Welcome to our very first true crime podcast.
Hi there.
I'm Holly.
I'm Danny.
And I just wanted to also thank you guys for joining our Facebook group for Creepy Comfort and Crime. Also, the Instagram page is doing really, really well. We've only been doing it for a couple of weeks, so thank you.
Thank you.
And how are you guys liking Abandoned Ontario? I hope you do. We really enjoy making those videos, and there's more to come.
Plenty more.
So there was a poll on the Facebook page asking which cult leaders you would like us to talk about. And so we're going to sort of start at the bottom and work our way up to number 1. So we're going to start with number 3. And number 3, most voted, was Roch Theriault and the Anthill Kids. So Roch was born May 16th, 1947 in Saguenay, Quebec. There's not too much about his childhood, really. The people in the town kind of thought the family was a little bit weird, and they would talk about when Roch was a child, he would play with a bear. He didn't have many friends, but he'd play with a bear.
That trips me out.
Yeah, and it's cute to think about, but it's yeah, there's not much. So I guess no news is good news, kind of at this point. But he was a really, really good student. He loved going to school, but in the area of Quebec that he lived in, I don't know if it was all over Quebec, but the area of Quebec that he lived in, the school only went to grade 7. And you didn't really have to go beyond it, I guess, because farming community, I guess.
I guess you wouldn't really need more education unless you're in like a well-to-do family in the city or something.
Yeah, if you're a farmer, it was a time when you could still thrive doing it. And even there was nothing really about Roch's teenage years. Like, you would think some of these cult leaders have these really horrible childhood. I mean, his father was an alcoholic. He did say that, but otherwise, uneventful youth, I guess. He did end up getting married. That was November 11th, 1967. Her name was Francine. They moved to Montreal, so that would have been a big deal for him, coming from a farming, small-town-ish community.
Well, yeah, for sure. It wouldn't be something be exposed to all kinds of new things, like, well.
Yeah, and that's where it kind of starts. So, but they had 2 sons together. He developed ulcers. Not sure why. He's always had digestive issues, so everyone said he was extra irritable because he always had these stomach issues. And the stomach issues are going to come to play a little bit later on. He really takes this and runs with it. And he was in the hospital a lot, seeing a lot of doctors, and he became really obsessed with medicine and particular surgeries, and he taught himself about anatomy, so that's weird.
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess he was probably interested in trying to deal with it for himself, and I don't know about the healthcare back then.
Oh, not well. Well, really, we talking about 60s? Well, not horrible.
Did they have OHIP by then,
or? I don't know.
Hmm.
Before my time. A little bit before my time.
Yeah.
But, so I think living in the city sort of did something to him, and he started drinking very heavily, and he was cheating on his wife constantly, and
which there must have been. I mean, it's usual for cult leaders, I guess, to be somewhat charismatic, but I mean, he already had a wife, and then he was cheating around too. Like, I mean, that's kind of something that's pretty similar between all the cult leaders, really, isn't it?
Yeah, you can see where it's going here. If you know anything about cults and cult leaders, you already see this is going down that familiar path, I guess.
Yeah.
He discovered the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, this was after, actually, I should have mentioned it before, they ended up separating and divorcing because he'd spent all their money on booze and this one particular mistress. So they divorced, and he moved in with the mistress, and then he now is with Seventh-day Adventist Church, and he ended up working his way pretty high up in that church, even though after a while a lot of the I guess it's the congregation thought he was a bit of a strange dude. He was getting really fierce with it, I guess, and he started to develop his own following through the church. That's how it started. That's how he got his followers. It started with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
And they were very, I mean, what was that, after or before he had developed a drinking problem? Because he was pretty against all that, too, at some point, wasn't he?
He went back and forth. Actually, through this whole thing, he'll go back and forth. He'll clean right up, and then he'll bottom out, and then it's like up and down, up and down. So that's all through his life, pretty much. So he gained followers through the church, and over time he took his followers and moved out of the town, out of the city. He took them into the woods, and they were building a commune there. So this is typical, very typical.
They usually start, I guess, because they're so adamant on having their own ideas and their own way of life. It usually seems to start out like that, where they're all kind of have a collective idea, and, you know, all for the greater good, so to speak. But then it all, I don't know, everyone starts to, I don't know, it's almost like, well, I guess kind of developing their own beliefs, but then they just...
It's not a long-term thing. I don't know how long. I wish I would have looked into it, actually, to see how long, like, what is the longest running cult, or like how, it just doesn't seem like a long-term thing. It either ends absolutely in a disaster and tragedy, or it just sort of falls apart, and, you know, but it always ends.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Unless I don't think there's a cult that's still going from back in the times, but so yeah, he took his following, basically created his cult. He had them really brainwashed. They considered him to be a guru. Actually, at one point, he opened up a clinic.
Yeah, healer.
He did this, but he would have people coming to him with, say, that were suffering with cancer or serious ailments, and he would be putting them on diets and prescribing them things, and he didn't even go to college. He only went to grade 7, but I guess he thought he could do it.
Was there anyone who actually thought he was not qualified, but, like, is there anyone who was happy with his treatments and their results, do you know? Or, like, anyone, did he actually heal?
Yeah, well, I think that clinic was sort of a front for his cult, actually, because he gained followers actually through that clinic.
Yeah.
Anyway, actually, there was a woman under his care that passed away. And
at the clinic?
at the clinic. So
it would be bad for business.
Well, they shut down after that, and that's just before they went up to the hills. And so at this point, they're building their commune, and things are going really downhill. He was back and forth with drinking. He started to sort of lose his mind after a while. The power got to him, and he just thought he can do anything. And like I said, he had them really super brainwashed. It's scary. And the things that happened there, we're not going to cover them. He's an actual monster, and they all sort of did monstrous things to each other, actually. So we're not really going to talk about that part of it, but let's just say it's horrible, and there was death involved, and injury and torture, and that's about as far as we'll go. But this went on for years, and the group was known by the people in the town. They knew there was like a weirdo group who lived up on the hills, and they were hippies or a sex cult or something was going on up there. And so they were known, and the police had gone up there a few times. There were actually some of the followers didn't want to be with him anymore, and they left. So that started the cycle of a follower would leave and go to the police. The police would go check on him. He would usually get arrested and brought down to the station, even though there wasn't really... The police didn't know about the deaths. They just knew that there was suffering, and they were actually really hungry up there. I think they were living off of potatoes and corn, and that's the only food that they had. So it was...
I wouldn't want to be there either if that was all. Well, I mean, obviously other reasons why you wouldn't want to be there, but...
Yeah, well, I mean, it was so bad that he had one of his young followers. Well, he was basically pimping her out to the local grocery store owner for food. So it got really, really bad, but the police would go arrest him. There was a number of times they did psychological testing on him, and he always passed.
Somehow.
So he would use that as ammunition, basically, or to kind of prove his point to his followers, because he'd say, see, I did psychological testing with the police and I'm fine, and there's nothing wrong going on up here, sort of thing. So it made them even more like, oh, I know he's a great guy.
Yeah, it turned it to like an advantage for himself.
And he used that all the time. Like, even he was so manipulative. Like, remember I was saying about the stomach issues that would come into play later? So when they were building this commune, he never did any of the hard labor. He said he was there spiritually for everybody, but because he always had stomach pain. So he said he could never... He said it possibly might even be cancer, but so he never actually helped to build the commune. He just sort of sat back and watched everybody else. But
also, that's kind of the same thing with most cults too, isn't it? Where the leader he has everyone else do their bidding, and
maybe, because Jim Jones wasn't there actually physically building Jonestown when you think of it, and
no, that's true.
There's a couple of them.
Well, I thought I'd seen one of the pictures of Jim Jones where he was helping with something. I think that was him. I couldn't actually see his face, I guess, but it looked like it was him. It was... I don't...
We'll talk about Jim Jones. Actually, he's, might as well just say, he was number 2, so he's going to be next. So, yeah, Jim Jones, and actually, Roch Theriault, same thing. The media sort of, they use the media. So Jim Jones used the media. He said, look at us, we're doing this. But he was only actually participating in it when the media was there or reporters were there, because, he basically was forced to leave America and go to Guyana. But
Yeah.
he's next. Back to Theriault. So back and forth to jail. The police were really negligent in this case, in our opinion, because they had him a number of times. It would be a follower would leave, go to the police arrest him. He would go down the police station. He'd be in jail for a couple days or maybe a year probation. And he'd be released. And it would happen time and time again. I mean, he was arrested like probably 4 or 5 times for very similar crimes.
Well, a lot of it could have been avoided, you know, if they would have really... I mean, they could have been a little more insistent with it.
Well, they were watching him too, because actually, back to Jim Jones, I guess, this was at the time that Jonestown was happening, when it was coming down really heavy on Roch Theriault. It got really, really bad for them. He was arrested for obstruction of justice. He was actually in prison for about a year, and his followers... he was jailed in Quebec City, so his followers moved to Quebec City so they can be near him and still see him while he was in prison. So, and you would think that they would, if he were in prison, this was their chance to leave, but they all stayed.
I mean, they're probably all keeping an eye on each other too during that time. He probably even told a bunch of them to keep your eye on this one, keep your eye on that one. Like,
he did turn them against each other, and it also got violent amongst the followers. Spouses turning on each other, parents turning against their kids.
And that's definitely a lot of power over people too. You can even make spouses
to do that to a mother to her child. That's crazy. I guess to sum it all up, they did eventually get him in the end. It got really, really bad in Quebec for them, so they left Quebec and they started pretty much a new... Well, they tried to build another new commune in Ontario. That didn't last long, though. It's the same stuff was happening, and there was actually a murder that was reported, and I think it sort of took the Ontario Provincial Police, I suppose, to really finish him off. So anyway, a murder was reported. It was the same thing. A follower had left and contacted police in Ontario, and he was finally arrested.
This was that, I can't remember her name, but if it's the one I'm thinking of, the one who finally got him dealt with, she went through a lot before she decided to leave. Like, the power he had over her mentally. Yeah,
and she was there since she was 19 years old.
Yeah.
I believe.
And again, we'll leave that up to you to look into what she went through. She went through a lot.
But stayed with him.
Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, until there were things that happened that it just sort of put her over the edge, and she had enough. And, you know, when they were in Ontario, they tried to make an honest go of it, despite all of these things that were happening. They had set up their commune, and they were growing fruit, and they were selling baked goods, and they were trying to legitimately have a business, like Start Fresh in Ontario. And this is where the Anthill kids comes from, was their little business, their little bakery business. Because he said they worked like a nest of ants. They worked so hard to do all this baking and the gardening, and so that's where that came from.
Another of his I don't know how to put it. Just, he had punishments for if you didn't meet your quota, selling for the bakery too. Like, that was another thing I'm sure that would have been
See, yeah, that was the thing. He was the problem. His followers were doing great, and they were so happy to have a legitimate business, and it was doing very, very well and bringing in a lot of money to them. But he didn't change. Actually, he got a lot worse. He started involving drugs on top of the alcoholism, and he had completely lost his mind at this point. So, finally, it was Gabrielle who escaped and went to the police. He was extradited into New Brunswick. I'm not sure why Quebec, because the majority of the incidents happened in Quebec. I don't know why. Maybe they just didn't want him in Quebec. I have no idea. He was extradited to New Brunswick, though. So after a lengthy trial in January 1993, Theriault was sentenced to life in prison for various murders and other things that came out of it. The police actually destroyed the commune that they had built in Quebec. Later on, they went back and they'd found bodies that had been buried, and yeah, he was completely done for. But still, some of his followers stayed true to him, I guess. I'm not sure how long, but even after him being sentenced to life in prison, they were still like, oh, we love you.
Yeah, which, I don't know. I mean, they knew everything that was happening. So even if, it was the police that found out, and it's obviously illegal, almost everything he was doing.
Yeah, he's a monster, bad all around.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing to think that there would still be people following him, but I mean, this is where those people were, I guess. But it's hard to think if these leaders, they usually say they communicate with God, or they're God's, they're acting through God, and then you see all these things happening. How can you even...
They all do it too. They all are the, I am your representative, or I'm God's representative here on earth, or
Savior.
You'll get to God through me, sort of thing. Yeah, Savior. They all do that. It's so strange. It's so strange. And I mean, even talking about followers after life imprisonment, when we talk about Charles Manson, want to talk about devoted followers, even gaining followers decades after the crimes happened, generations of people. But that's going to be a video on its own. That's actually going to be our part 2.
Next one,
yeah. So, because that's a big story. It kind of needs its own time. So like I said, he was in 1993 finally sentenced to life in prison. February 26, 2011, after an altercation with another inmate. The inmate's name was Matthew Gerard. He stabbed Theriault in the neck with a shiv, and Theriault died. He was 63 years old. So when Matthew stabbed him, I guess they must have shared a cell together. I believe he was a cellmate. So Matthew went to one of the prison guards, and he's basically, not in so many words, but he said, yeah, we had a fight and he's dead, and I'm just letting you know I killed him.
I think he gave him the knife, and he just said that POS is on the floor. I killed that POS.
Yeah, so that happens. I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer, he was killed in prison too. I mean, luckily, he wasn't a cult leader, thank goodness.
Oh man,
that would have been that would have been much.
That would have been a lot.
But yeah, so that's the basic story of Roch Theriault. Like, the stuff that we left out is just the brutal stuff. So it seems like kind of a short story, but just so you have the gist of it. And if you want the other the details, there's other YouTube videos about it, or you can look it up. Like, it's out there. I don't like to talk about that kind of stuff, especially when it involves children. So
there's a lot. It's very disturbing, so that's why we leave it up to you, because at first I wasn't even sure I wanted to talk about it, and we decided just to leave that stuff out, because I don't think either of us could sit through really having to say it, let alone hearing it in the first place.
We weren't going to talk about him at all, but I think once we talk about the others and we sum up about cult leaders and about cults, you'll see that there's common threads that run through all of them. Absolutely all of them, especially the top 3 that we're going to be talking about. So that is the story of Mr. Theriault, who got what he had coming to him, as far as I'm concerned. I don't like to see people get harmed, but this guy, to me, he is one of the worst. Like, if it's not Numbers. Numbers is going to be the next fellow we're going to be talking about. It's not even about that. It's just that he was just a horrible person.
He had people do his bidding, but some of the worst things he did himself. Like, we mentioned about him studying anatomy.
Yeah, there was a reason for that, and he sure used that knowledge not for any good. It'd be different if he went to university and became a doctor. I would, be like, okay, but he didn't use it for good whatsoever. He thought he was a surgeon. He thought he could be a surgeon from reading that anatomy book.
Yeah.
Come on, guy.
He utilized it.
He did.
Put it that way.
He did. Anyway, that's his story. That was number 3. I'm glad he's gone. We're going to move on to number 2. So number 2 from the poll was Jim Jones in the People's Temple, which really surprised me, because I figured there was just so much out there, and, it was sort of a done deal. Nobody was really talking about him very much anymore, but I still like to learn about Jim Jones. I find him very fascinating, actually, so in a way I'm also glad that he was on the list. So at least you'll get our take on it. I'm sure everyone's familiar with this story, but we'll give you the gist, and then we'll have a chat about him. So what do you think about Jim Jones?
Jim Jones? Well, it sounds like a band, for one. Jim Jones and the People's Temple.
You don't want to name a band.
No,
Jim Jones and the People's
No.
Temple.
Although from what I had seen on YouTube, there is some kind of musical artist called Jim Jones, which is kind of unfortunate.
Well,
maybe it's good for him, I don't know, but at first he had some good ideas. He was very inclusive, like, for the time.
Yeah, they all start off with these great intentions, I guess.
Well, he put them into action too, though. Like, at first, he wasn't okay with segregation. He wanted to bring people together no matter where they're from, skin color, all that stuff. Like, he started out with some pretty good ideas. Like,
yeah, actually, he's always been interested in religion and preaching, and there was a church that he wanted to work at, but I don't know who the hierarchy would be in the church. They didn't want people of color in the church, and Jim Jones was dead against that, so he didn't end up taking that job. That was how he ended up with his own church, actually, and he gained a following through his first job as a preacher.
He's very charismatic, and I guess...
Yeah.
Well, he thought he was a healer, too. At least he told people he was a healer, so...
It was more to get people to come into the church.
Yeah.
And maybe after a while he actually believed that he was a healer, but... So he got his own following in Indiana, and he ended up bringing his followers. I think there was about maybe 100 followers he would bring to California, and he would start his own church. And California was very open-minded at the time. There wasn't really segregation or anything of that sort there. And so yeah, he was doing really well. And actually the People's Temple grew fast, and he was doing the right thing. He opened food banks and soup kitchens, and he helped people find work. Like, it's so strange, because he did a lot of good. He'd help war veterans, and it just like amazing.
And of course, if you know how it ended, which almost everyone does nowadays, it's hard to believe that it would be the same group of people, or the same cult that ended up that way.
Well, but at the same time, he also chose California because it was rumored to be one of the few parts of America that would be safe from a nuclear attack. So he was sort of, I guess that was a thing. He read it. He said he read it somewhere, and that was another reason why he chose California.
I thought they did a lot of testing out there. I mean, it might not be an attack, but...
It was Northern California, so I don't know.
Well, yeah.
But hey, the People's Temple grew in Northern California, started making its way down, expanded into San Francisco, where he continued to help the elderly, mentally ill, low-income families. He was loved and respected, and he was gaining followers like crazy. It was quite the thing, actually. And yeah, when you think about how it all ended, you just wonder, like, what was that point where it went from that to that?
Yeah. I mean, where did his delusions start leading him down? Because I know he was very paranoid about the government, which, I mean, you wouldn't be if you weren't doing anything wrong. Let's put it that way. So he obviously knew deep down inside somewhere that what he was doing was wrong.
Yeah, but there was a lot of financial kind of stuff that sort of opened the doors for the government to get involved in his religious organization. So he really actually admired communism. So he, instead of the religion at the People's Temple, he was changing it kind of into a political organization, and it started to go further downhill from there. The power kind of got to him. He wanted people to proclaim devotion to him, and then people started giving their money and possessions and giving them their children.
He was taking over their lives.
Yes.
Like, literally. And
yeah, and actually, I'm not even sure if I mentioned it with Roch Theriault, but it was the same thing. The first big group of followers that he got, they sold their homes. They brought their children to him to live with him. And sometimes the parents wouldn't even live with them. They would just bring their children.
Drop the kids off. Yeah.
So it was getting like that with Jim Jones at this point, too.
The only thing I will say, I mean, those who did survive and managed to escape, when they were very young, they always said they had memories of just children of every color, every race, just didn't even matter, like they were just in an inclusive society where...
Yeah, Jim was way ahead of his time when it came to being inclusive, and yeah, that's why he's so interesting. He was such a good and really groundbreaking back then.
Yeah. Really,
really groundbreaking, and it just all went wrong. Well, he started into drugs too. Unfortunately, amphetamines and barbiturates, so he would stay awake for days, and it would cause him to have mood swings, making his health deteriorate like crazy, and he started becoming even more paranoid. So that team, with this power he had over these people, and he was reading all this communist literature, getting very political instead of spiritual, And then he has these drugs on top of it, so he's becoming paranoid. He started to believe that the government, in particular the CIA and the FBI, were watching him and would come to get him eventually. And because he didn't want anybody ruining his party.
And a lot of that is also what he used to control his followers too, as he would say. I mean, same with a lot of cults. They villainize the outside world. So, you know, he would tell people that the government's coming to ruin their way of life, to ruin what they have. And again, at first he was doing some good things. But then it started going downhill, and he still would be adamant that what they're doing is the right way to live.
Yeah, and that's all. They're all like that. They're just all like that.
Yeah.
Actually, it kind of brought David Koresh to mind. From Waco, he was sort of the same thing. They're coming for us, and I will save you. And it's so weird. It's so weird how they all think of any cult that you know of. Look into a few more, and it's all going to be the same story. It's a strange thing. It's almost as if it's meant to happen. I mean, I don't mean that in a harmful way. It's just, why does it go that way for all of them?
Yeah.
It always ends bad.
I mean, and that's probably how, I mean, I don't know so much the same thing, but even ancient cultures could have started the same way, where you have somebody who starts to get all this power over people, and they consider themselves godly or in communication with the gods, and then they start being worshipped. I mean, it depends. Like, once it starts becoming like a big organized religion, so to speak, like the old empires and stuff.
I guess it's just always been a thing. Actually,
it's unavoidable
since the beginning of time. I mean, even some people would claim Jesus sort of had a little followers or cult going. I don't know, but it's just, and it's always ends terribly. Always. So because of this expose that was written in a local newspaper, it sort of pushed him over the edge, and that is when they decided to move the People's Temple from America, and they found their spot in Guyana, South America. Okay, so he convinced many of his congregation to move to Guyana and develop a commune, which they named Jonestown.
Was it Jonestown, and they called it an agricultural project?
Yes.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Which, I mean, it kind of was. Like, they did have a lot of... They developed the land and stuff, but...
Sure, again, they did.
He had them do most of the work before he even left America, like...
Yeah, he was kind of the last one to go there. So he ended up moving there full-time in 1977. And before he got there, he used to visit, and usually he would bring some kind of media with him. And this is what I was talking about earlier. So he would bring some cameramen from various television stations or photographers for newspapers, and he would give them a tour. Look how well we're doing here. Look at this. Look at that. Look what we have. And of course, they would go back to America and they would put it all in the papers. Well, maybe he's okay. Maybe they're all right. We saw it with our own two eyes.
Which is also kind of like how can I phrase that? A dictator's move. Like putting out the
propaganda.
Yeah, propaganda, positive PR.
I never thought about that, but actually it is propaganda. It's literally propaganda.
And they basically are dictators too in cults, like their leaders, because they hide them, that hold themselves, as these godly individuals, and they deserve to be followed and worshipped. But then, when there's media involved or someone who could possibly out them and all their evil deeds, they're have to tell people to play along.
Yeah, well, I guess he kind of, that's why he took control. of the media. Like, pretty much.
Yeah, and yet, until he started losing it, he was a charismatic guy, too.
Oh, yeah. It didn't have to go the way it did, but... So at this time, there were about 1,000 members of the People's Temple permanently living in Guyana, in Jonestown. So he gained very strict control over them, of course. He used mind-altering drugs to manage them. He'd stockpiled Quaaludes, Demerol, Valium, morphine, and over 11,000 doses of Thorazine. And he was using them on his people. And apparently it was being put into drinks, or he would just tell the people to take them, and they would, and he would manipulate their minds. So it went way downhill. And they were, like I said, before he got there, they were doing just fine. And when he was living there full time, a few of the survivors said that's when it all changed. It was better when he wasn't there, but I guess that wasn't,
Well, and he had like the speaker system set up throughout the whole place where he could give his sermons and...
Yeah, in the pavilion. So that was a whole other thing. And that's when they knew there was something big going down. So he would... I'm sure you've all seen that pavilion, and he had a throne, and he had a speaker system that actually went through the entire commune, even inside of buildings as well, even inside of dwellings.
The individual?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, the higher ranking members. And he would sit there, and they would have meetings and gatherings and socials and things like that, but when it was getting toward the end, he was basically sitting there by himself and just rambling. He was on a lot of those drugs himself. And drinking.
Too, right?
Yeah, he was drinking too. So there's another. They all drink. Which,
I mean, I guess... Well, I mean, it's a coping mechanism for a lot of people in the real world anyways, but you think about the stress he put on himself because he's just being led by all his delusions and all these mind-altering substances and alcohol.
I couldn't even imagine.
It's just
imagine, like, what happened there? What happened there? He was doing so good.
I wonder if he, I mean, I doubt it, but I wonder if, given his sort of religious start, that maybe he was questioning to himself whether, like, I don't know if he was... I mean, he was a preacher. He did a lot of sermons, and he apparently, even when he was a child, he knew the Bible very well.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, I just wonder if eventually he was, like, sort of asking himself, he's like, am I really doing... I mean, I can't see how he would think he was doing the Lord's work eventually.
No, he still thought that. He still thought that. But it's all left up to interpretation, I guess, what they consider to be the Lord's work. Roch Theriault thought he was doing the Lord's work too. So it's whatever they think is the Lord's work.
Yeah.
So the living conditions at the commune actually started to decrease. So there became a lack of food because more followers were coming over, because they seen how the media had put Jonestown out there like this beautiful commune and everybody's getting along and, a rainbow of people. And so he got more follower, but then it was less food. So they were surviving on black-eyed peas, rice, and Kool-Aid. Some of the followers actually wrote home to their family members telling them about the living conditions, and their families ended up approaching then California Representative Leo Ryan, and it sparked a need for investigation.
Well, and how, weren't they like screening any mail that came in and out too? Like, it's amazing that they even got mail to their families to say that.
Yeah, he did actually. He took control over the mail, and I'm not sure how the letters got out, unless it was just a time when he didn't know, or I'm not 100%, but letters did get back home, and it was a very different story than what everyone was led to believe by the media. That's for sure. So Representative Ryan decided it was time to take a trip down to Jonestown himself to see exactly what's going on. He took a film crew with him to investigate. Jim Jones heard about this trip, and he knew he was going to have a visit from Representative Ryan, so his paranoia just like went off the charts, and he felt his worst nightmares were coming true.
He definitely looked worried. Like, you can find it all over YouTube, the footage from the visit, and you could see, like, there were times where they spoke to him and they spoke to the followers who were around, but any shots you could see of Jim, or like candid shots, he looked very concerned. Like,
he was sweating. He looked, you could tell he was on drugs.
Yeah.
You could tell he was drunk. You could tell he was just right out of his mind. And scared. And very, very scared.
Yeah. He knew, at any time, no matter what a reaction would be, he knew that anyone could say anything at any time about it, and he was a member of the government, so...
Yeah, no, I think he knew it was coming to an end. Actually, when he heard about Representative Ryan coming, he had gathered all of his followers in the pavilion, and he gave them all a drink of Kool-Aid, and he said to them, drink it. So they drank it, and he said, oh, good. He said, I just want to make sure that if I ever wanted to poison you, that you would drink it. So they practiced that, and I'm not sure if that's a fact that is out there, but I was looking at a documentary about Jonestown. It was actually the survivors of Jonestown. It's very, very interesting. And they practiced that already, and everyone was obviously weirded out by it, but it was, in the end, that's exactly what happened.
Well, because I thought, didn't he tell them, like, when they did that, I thought he told them that it was poison. And like, he was basically like, that was when he said, I was testing your faith afterwards, because...
Yeah, I guess he more or less wanted to see if they would drink it, really. And it was called... Now, there's a word I can't use, but... Revolutionary unaliving yourself is what they called it. So they had a name for it. It was definitely something that he was willing to do as needed, because he didn't want to be arrested and he didn't want anybody to leave. He'd rather everyone die than be taken, and he would tell them that on a regular basis. So Representative Ryan shows up, and he hosted a party for him, and there was dancing and food, and it was...
He made it look like a good place to be.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. You could see it, though, in, like Danny was saying, you could see it in Jim, that all through this part, and there's video of it. You can definitely see it all through this gathering, and you could see Jim just in the corner like, oh, I hope this works. I hope this works. And you could see he was just freaking out. And after the gathering and after talking to people... Representative Ryan he said, this is not at all what I thought. It's actually a good place, and these are good people. So
I think that was when he mentioned that quite a few of the people he spoke to told him it was either the best thing that ever happened to them or the best place to be, and then everyone was up in, well.
And then I think they were trying to save their life, because if it was shut down, they knew that they would have to die. So I think the followers were doing their best just to, okay, you've seen it's all good here, now go back to America and leave us alone, kind of thing, because it was their life was on the line.
Yeah.
They knew what would happen. And it's too bad, actually, that he didn't have police with him, because they probably could have arrested Jim Jones right there.
Well, it looked like they had some kind of armed forces with them, because you're about to find out what happened if you don't already know, but I was sure in the footage it looked like there was some military guys there or something, or at least some kind of police force from Guyana. But
eventually, I don't think they were there with him that night.
Well, maybe not at first, yeah.
Because
you'd have thought they would have had his own security. Or at least a gun or something.
He had a bunch of people with cameras with him, so even if something happened, I mean, he probably didn't think anyone was going to try anything when he had literal news reporters and whatnot with him, because it would all be, somebody would have footage of it, I guess.
Yeah.
He probably just didn't think anyone would have the guts to do what was done.
Plus, too, I mean, I don't know if they already knew that Jim was unhinged. He probably would have thought going in with like a show of force would probably look,
Probably, yeah, but I mean, that would be another thing, that he probably figured it was putting people's lives at risk. Like, he didn't want to rock the boat just in case.
Yeah.
Well, so Representative Ryan he said, it's all good here. We're going to go back to California tomorrow and, continue on, more or less. So the next morning, he was about to leave to fly back to California. He was passed a note by a follower on his way out.
Well, it was one of the cameraman or something, right? And he ended up giving it to...
He gave it to Representative Ryan. Yeah. So Representative Ryan read it, and on the note it said that the follower really wanted to leave, but Jim wasn't letting anybody leave. So what does Representative Ryan do? And I think this was a poor...
bad move.
Poor choice. So he has the note in his hand, and he goes over to Jim Jones, and he said, I was just passed this note by one of your followers saying they want to leave and you won't let them. Is this true? And Jim said, oh, of course it's not true. They can leave if they want.
I think there's also footage of that, isn't there?
There is footage of that.
Because he literally was like sitting down with him, and he asked him, he's like, what is this? Which, again, probably things would have gone totally different if he just didn't say anything and tried to get the people out. But
why he did that, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's just, maybe it was just a knee-jerk reaction to confront him. But wow, if he didn't say anything.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, at the same time, though, Jim had such a close eye on everybody that people couldn't even escape into the jungles without being noticed.
Yeah.
So
he would literally send somebody after you if you tried to leave.
Yeah.
And there were people that got away that made it through the jungle, but can you imagine a jungle on top of it, on top of people coming after you? Like, there was a woman who left with her son and got away when things were going down, and Jim actually sent her own husband after her. Yeah. And he was going to get her and kill her and her son. I mean, that's how brainwashed they were.
Yeah, you weren't even safe from your own family members there. I think the kids were the only well, there was people who were there against their will, so to speak, but I think the kids were the only innocent ones, really, like, who didn't fully grasp the situation. I mean, if that's the way they grew up from a very young age, then, you know, they don't necessarily know anything different for the most part.
Yeah. So Jim, he basically said to Representative Ryan, you know, some people like to lie, you know, kind of, play games, sort of the devil's getting to them sort of thing, or, you know, there's something wrong with them. But I think Jim knew that it was, he knew, obviously, of course. Yeah. I mean, that's why it just upsets me so much about why would Leo Ryan do this? Why would he show him the note? That's terrible. And can you imagine how that poor follower felt?
Yeah.
Knowing that he showed the note to Jim. That's scary. Like, that's super scary.
And the thing was, too, is because then representative there, he was like, you know, Jim said, whoever wants to leave can leave.
Yeah.
So he said, whoever wants to leave, come with us. And we'll set you up with a plane and we'll send you back.
Yeah. Yeah, so people did get to leave. Some people.
It was 2 planes, right?
Well, they had to get a second plane. Yeah. So a few people left with the representative. So they were it was just the small airplanes. It was just a small, what do you call it, airstrip?
Yeah. And it was the Guyana Airlines? Or?
Yeah, it was it was in the middle of the jungle, basically. So the people left with him. Representative Ryan, his camera crew, the followers made their way to the airstrip where a plane was waiting for them. But there were so many people that left. Leo Ryan, Representative Ryan, decided to let them use the first plane and that he would wait for another plane. When they were boarding, so that was Representative Ryan and his camera crew, were boarding the second plane, they were attacked by members of the People's Temple. Apparently it was incited by Jim Jones. I'm pretty sure it was.
I don't know if it was their actual plan to do what happened, if you know what happened.
No, if Representative Ryan just would have left, if this note didn't come up and the people didn't leave, it wouldn't have happened. It wasn't in the plan. I'm sure Jim would just preferred that, you know, he just left and went back to California and just made it all good again and they can be left alone out there.
Well, you'd think, even though he wanted all this power and he considered himself so special, that, you know, if you got over 1,000 people there, you could spare a couple just leaving. But
they're going to go back and tell everybody the truth.
Yeah.
So that was the thing.
That would bring the whole government down on them.
He didn't want anybody captured. He didn't want anybody leaving. So now people were leaving. So their big plan had to happen. And that must have been terrifying because everybody would have known.
Yeah, that's true.
So
they would want to, I mean, even if they didn't necessarily go there to expose them, they would get asked questions, which, you know, they'd probably just answer straight up.
If they were leaving, I'm sure they were going to expose them because they would know that lives were at risk. So I'm sure these people probably went to the authorities right away, or like there was a reason why they were leaving. So I'm sure definitely they would have reported it immediately, knowing what was about to happen, because they were also well aware what was about to happen.
So it was and there is footage of this too.
The camera crew recorded everything, the party, the incident with the note, them actually going to the plane and being shot at. And when the cameraman was hit and killed, his camera was still filming. But the gunmen didn't do anything with the cameras. I don't think they really even thought about it. But the cameras were found, and they have footage of the entire, that whole 24 hours.
Yep.
Toward the end.
And it was basically, you see people boarding the plane, and then I think the next bit of footage is the cameras on the floor, and then you see where it was a tractor with, I don't know, 4 or 5 people, I think, and they just got off the tractor and opened fire, basically.
Yeah. So 4 people died on the airstrip, and that included Representative Ryan and various film crew. So when the guys, the militants, I suppose, went back and told Jim that they had killed Representative Ryan, well, that was it. Jim had lost it. He said, okay, they're going to come for us now. He gathered everybody at the pavilion. He said, this is it. They're coming for us. This is exactly what I was fearing was going to happen, and it's happening. So this is what we're going to do. He knew he was going to be arrested. If he were arrested, it would have been very, very bad for him.
Yeah.
Very, very bad for him. He didn't want to go to prison. He wasn't prison material. Not at all. He wanted to be in the middle of nowhere. He was free. And he would lose his accolades.
Basically lose any standing he would have had with any people, really, because he would have been exposed.
Yeah, they're all about reputation and everything. Very narcissistic behavior. So he encouraged his followers to take their own life. He knew it was over. He would be arrested soon. Those who didn't comply were forced. Men, women, children were made to drink cyanide and tranquilizer-laced grape flavor aids. So I'm sure you're all aware that it wasn't actually Kool-Aid. So the whole drink the Kool-Aid or whatever the saying is not true. It was Flavor Aid. So Flavor Aid was just sort of a cheaper version, I guess, of Kool-Aid, although they did have Kool-Aid there. But at the time they had more Flavor Aids, so that's what they used. Grape Flavor Aids. So I wonder.
I believe it was Kool-Aid when they did like the
test ones, because they were living off of it, right? So
and he had tons of this stuff as well, like.
But I should have looked into it. I wonder what happened with Flavor Aid, in particular grape, after this incident. It would have been kind of bad to still sell it.
Yeah, it would
wonder.
be. I mean, there's. Well, I mean, I don't know. There's probably. I don't want to say collectors, but there's probably somebody who still has some.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
Well, people collect all kinds of things these days.
I just wonder. Never thought about that.
Yeah.
So if you didn't drink the drink, you were injected with cyanide. And that was children and babies and everybody. So, and a few got away. We mentioned that woman who escaped with her son. There were a handful of people that did. And there is a really good, the documentary we were mentioning earlier about the survivors is on YouTube. It's worth a watch. They actually go back to Jonestown. And that was super interesting. And speaking of Jonestown now, kind of bridging over to our abandoned theme of the channel, Jonestown at the moment, 2023, is almost fully engulfed by the jungle. So I just thought I'd mention that because that's just kind of neat to think about. They sort of touch on it on that documentary where they go back to Jonestown, but it's almost completely disappeared. And there are still people that are buried there. So you can go to Jonestown now. I think there are urban explorers that have gone there.
Oh, really?
But it is the jungle, and it's very, very thick. It was in the middle of nowhere to begin with. So now being just totally abandoned for so long,
Well, I know, it definitely would be.
It would be wild. So I don't know, just a little crossover fact. 909 people took their own lives. Most not by choice, I'm sure. Most were forced. Jim's wife died by poison. And not one of Jim's children happened to be in the commune that day, and they were spared. So his own children never died.
Yeah, was it the one was playing, they had like a basketball team or a sports team or something, and the one, he was playing a game somewhere.
Yeah, I think it was for a school. He was in, I don't know what the name of the town would be. I'm pretty sure it was a school sport he had to do. Just so happened on that day. But he did call. He called somebody. Maybe his mom. I believe it was the mom. And she let him know. No, because the mom was against it. So Jim's wife was really obviously against it. And she begged him to not kill everybody, and he said, "Oh, settle down, woman. You know we have to do this," sort of thing. But I'm pretty sure it was, he called home and he was told to take your life. And he's sort of in the middle of town. He was at a basketball practice, and he's like, "No, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing over there? Like, this is insane." So, but none of his children, in the end anyway, were taken. And Jim died from a single gunshot to his head. So they figured that he did it to himself. Some say that somebody may have shot him. Either way, he's gone. And that's the end of People's Temple. It's bad. You've seen the overhead shots of the bodies, and it's very disturbing.
It's just such a, I mean, in terms of following, it's still like an astronomical amount of people to convince to take their own lives.
Or forced to. I mean, a lot of them were forced by gunpoint, and
who knows what else.
But some of them just did anyway. It's not known for sure the percentages, but when they were doing autopsies on a lot of the bodies, they were finding a lot more people were injected.
Yeah.
They're finding the needle marks. So, and that was at least half the people had needle marks.
Yeah. And, I mean, even more sad if you think about it. I mean, there were things like, you know, if you were questioning Jim, or, you know, you had started to have some different ideas, you know, you were shunned, sometimes like excommunicated, like people wouldn't talk to you at all. But most of the people there just thought they were living a good life. Like,
yeah, it's amazing what he made them believe.
Like, they just thought they were living away from the establishment. They were living, you know, if they were religious people too, they thought they were doing the Lord's work.
And he used to scare them too. It's the controlling the information that gets to them. So he would tell them, "Oh, in America, it's horrible, the riots. You wouldn't even believe it. You wouldn't even believe what's happening. You're so much safer here."
Yeah.
Like, he did that a lot to them too. He was the only cabin to have a radio was in his cabin. And he had the best cabin of all, of course. But yet the only radio in the entire commune was in Jim Jones's cabin.
But that, I mean, the radio, not just for news from the outside world, but for entertainment, they also had their own, they were able to have a band, play music together. And again, the children, they just enjoyed playing together no matter who they were, where they were from. Like, to them it was at first, a really good thing.
But then It might have been. I mean, the survivors said, yeah, at first it was fine. It was going really well. But then a lot of the footage that you see of all of that is what Jim manipulated to, like, look at our luscious gardens and our beautiful multicolored, multiracial rainbow children, he used to call them, playing together. And it just seemed like a utopia, but he was definitely controlling. Like, I'm sure he said to them, hey,
make sure you
smile, have fun, where's the food, let's do it up, for the media. So, yeah, it was a lot of that. So, I mean, was it happy from the beginning? I don't know how it could have been. It might have been, because they were all there for a common purpose, but...
Well, I think...
I don't know.
I don't know exactly how they did it, but they had the means to turn the land in Guyana into their own utopia. So, yes, they had to do a lot of the work, but it's not like they went there or Jim had them go there empty-handed. Like, they had the means to clear the land, build the houses, grow the food.
And they were happy to do it, too.
Yeah.
They were fine with it.
So they weren't just going there with nothing, like, to start.
But then it ended. And that's what I mean. It's always so good at a certain point, beyond good even. And then it just always ends so tragic when you think of it, with these cult leaders. Like, why? And some of them are... Roch Theriault was actually quite intelligent. He could have went further in school if he wanted to. Jim Jones was actually himself quite smart. He excelled in school. He had a very, very good memory, apparently. He could remember everything. Well, like all the 1,000 followers that were living with them, he would know everybody's name. So there's no doubt. I mean, it's too bad they couldn't have put that to good use, their intelligence.
Well, and also he, when he was a child, because of some unfortunate circumstances with his parents, he spent a lot of time alone. And this is where he'd be reading the Bible. He'd know all the verses. He could recite. What ended up, he befriended an old lady who was a member of the church, and she was impressed by his knowledge of the Bible, and that he could recite these verses without
easily.
Looking at it.
Yeah.
Even it was said that he would go into the woods and do sermons for the animals. And I don't know.
You know what? Okay,
I don't know who saw that. But.
It's funny that you brought up animals, because here's a fact that I don't think I ever heard it before. Even of all these years, sort of looking into the whole case. When he was a kid, Jim used to dress up, have some of the neighborhood kids come over, and he would do sermons to them, preach to them. And he started doing that when he was like 7 years old. And he did it for a couple of years. So not only was he preaching to them, quoting the Bible and whatnot, he used to perform funeral sermons of carcasses, I guess, roadkill. But the problem was that there was a lot of funeral sermons, and sort of the neighborhood parents would get together and say, where is he getting all these animals that are gone? Like, so I think there was a thing sort of back in the day where they were thinking, is he killing them?
There was...
Because that's a big thing, with especially serial killers.
Yeah.
Animals.
One of the documentaries we had seen, or an informative piece I had seen, there was a report of a child. I mean, I don't I don't really want to say what it was that they saw him do, but I don't want to go there. It's it wouldn't be easy for anyone to hear, let alone me say it. But somebody saw him injure an animal in a certain way. So there is at least one report of him doing that. I don't know if that was one that he did a funeral for, but
yeah, there's just something there. That's another common thread, is this thing with harming animals. So, and it's always when they're a child too. So looking back at Jim Jones' early years was also fairly uneventful, aside from that weird fact. But, you know, he was married, he had one child, they adopted many children. It was sort of normal at first.
Yeah, I mean, it tends to kind of start out that way, but it depends how well they hide. Like, maybe if they have these personality traits, they probably get pretty good at hiding it pretty young.
I don't know. I feel like it's something that gets sparked within them at some point. I don't know if they're really... It could be that they're just struggling their whole childhood and through their teenage years with this issue, and it just sort of comes out as an adult because you can actually act it out as an adult. Or it's just something snaps. Not sure, but... Yeah, so that's the story of Jim Jones, People's Temple. I feel terrible about all those poor people that lost their lives. Jim, you know, he could have did better. I still don't know where it went wrong. I know it, you know, he started taking the drugs and everything, but
how did that even start too?
It just did like a 180. Yeah. Somehow he was doing some good stuff. In Jim Jones's case and Roch Theriault, to a certain extent, both started off good. Jim Jones shockingly good and went to shockingly terrible. So our next video is going to be the number one voted in the poll, and that's Charles Manson and the Manson family. So he didn't have a very good start. He had actually an infamously terrible start in life, yeah. Charles Manson. So it's no wonder things happened how they happened. But he's going to be a whole other video. All right, so thank you so much for joining us for our part 1 of this Cult Leader podcast. We really appreciate your support.
Yes.
If you could, please leave a like, subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks again to everyone who is part of our Facebook group and have followed us on Instagram. There's going to be a few more videos coming very, very soon, including part 2 featuring the Manson family.
Oh, yeah.
And we should have another Abandoned Ontario video coming very, very soon. We have another drive-in theater and a few other surprises. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And we'll see you soon. Bye now.
Bye.